you get a sense of the tool that you're using and how it works. So we'll start with some really simple things and then we'll progress to slightly more complex warm-up exercises. This is one of the sheets in the workbook. Let's go through it now and I'll explain some bits and pieces here. One of the most fundamental things you can do that really explain this tool quite well is draw an X. So pulling in, you generally pull rather than push when you're writing with a broad nib pen. This particular tool does give you a bit more flexibility because it's quite versatile like that, so you can actually push, but generally speaking, when you're writing with it, you'll pull, as in pull the nib down. You wouldn't push up very often. I mean, it depends on the paper you're using, it depends what you're trying to do, but it's a general rule, it's you wouldn't really do that at all. One of the fundamental strokes in italic is the drawing of stems. So if you're drawing an I, this would obviously be the main stroke style, main stroke of an I. You've got that 5-degree angle from the vertical in terms of that everything's leaning slightly to the right. You're also holding the pen at 45 degrees, so you can see how it terminates and begins this stroke. You've got this 45-degree angle here, and that's absolutely key. So if you're drawing an actual I, you do this zigzag thing, and that just adds finesse and beauty. This wonderful contrast in strokes is kind of what makes this beautiful. One of the things. You're also going to think about now horizontal strokes. Now there are characters like the F and the T crossbars that you'll need to draw these, but it's a good exercise just to try and get nice, even, straight lines. And then we'll think about the O. Now it's a very characteristic kind of O in this particular style, which has kind of sharpened top and bottom. You can see what this tool is naturally, the kind of shapes you're naturally getting. And you can see it's just it's just a beautiful contrast. Contrast is one of the keys to what makes something gives it a vitality. So again, just a zigzag, really simple. Just try and keep the lines as straight as possible, and just understand that the way that you move with this tool will shape the thickness of the line. Next exercise, let's draw some plus symbols. You can see how actually part of the 45-degree angle thing is when you have a kind of even vertical and horizontal strokes of the same weight, which is really useful, especially in capitals. This is kind of the essence of why you have a 45-degree angle. You'll see more about this later. Now we're getting to exercises that are very much related to the U and the M or the N characters. These are absolutely key characters in the lowercase. There's a lot of forms that are based on these characters. So let's just draw a U. 45-degree angle. And down. There's a slight curve when I go up. And it's down in a straight line. So this is really important, kind of get into the rhythm of these kind of shapes. You can see how the tool is naturally creating hairlines, which are the hairlines of the finer points here. And that would be a kind of U exercise, warm-up exercise. Let's have a go at the N or the M warm-up exercise, which principle's the same. You're kind of doing an arc, and you want to leave this springing out should occur somewhere in the middle. of the stroke. So you can take the pen off the paper here. Between when this junction, when you're going into this junction here and you're arcing out. Yeah, this kind of departure point should be roughly in the middle. So this is just getting your hand-eye coordination in the right zone, and you kind of there are multiple reasons to warm up like this. You're just getting, and you're also getting into a kind of a rhythm and a kind of developing a kind of Zen-like focus on what you're doing. You're thinking everything else should be just sort of fading away, and it's very meditative calligraphy. It can be very calming and relaxing. The most difficult thing here is probably this junction, departing from the stem, and it's a sort of motion. It's like an arc. You know, the ideal arc would be something that starts thin and gets slightly thicker as it goes out, because that's key to that kind of arc is key to so much of the lowercase. If you look at the way my hand's moving now, when I'm coming out, I'm drawing an N again, and it's a sort of movement like this. So I'm not really, it's not my fingers so much, my whole hand. If you press the pen too hard, you might damage the nib. I certainly, when I first started, I seemed to burn through at least one of these pens a week because I was pressing way too hard. So it's good to know that you don't need to do that. If you press too softly, and if you're not sort of committed in what you're doing, there's a possibility that you'll have a sort of wobbliness. This tool is incredibly sensitive to your kind of, you can read almost people's state of mind when they're doing calligraphy. Any lack of confidence will be really clear to begin with, and there's a look. You can see confidence and you can see uncertainty, and it's a very sensitive pen, very sensitive tool for gauging that kind of thing. Okay, so we've been warming up, and I think we're getting to grips with the warm-up forms. So let's move on to the lowercase. Okay, so this is a page from your workbook that's going to show you how to construct letter forms, and it's showing what's called the ductus, which is the order of strokes. So there are 4 strokes that make up a lowercase a, for example, and you can see here the motion, the direction, and the order of the strokes, and I've applied that across the alphabet. So let's talk about these related groups that form a really good basis for practice. There are 4 related groups. The first one is based on the letter O. The second group is based on the letter N. The third group is based on the letter U. And then all of these characters need to match. So there are things that I'll illustrate here. There are diagonal characters that you'd be looking to for consistencies in as well. So let's draw some of these. Okay, I'll set up the grid again, italic grid. So this is, do you remember in the warm-up exercises, one of the characters that I drew was a lowercase o. I'm going to concentrate now on drawing the o and the related forms. I can talk through what's happening afterwards. Okay, so let's look at what brings all of these characters together. You've got this stroke here, the first stroke in the lowercase o. You can see it's echoed in the C and the E, to a certain extent the G, and to a certain extent the S. You can see the similarity in shapes here. The E is actually very close to being the O, it just curves around more quickly. One of the most difficult characters to draw here is in the lowercase is probably the lowercase s. I'll draw that quickly here. I'm drawing an S. You've got the spine, which you want to be in the middle of the X height. Remember those five? You've got these 5 nibwidths. 3, 4, 5, and you're kind of drawing the middle in the middle 3 nibwidths, and then you're adding these strokes. It's permissible to dip a little bit below the X height or the baseline on the lowercase stroke, but that one's a bit wide. So that's one of the more tricky characters to draw. If you look at the bottom stroke on the S, it should be a little bit beyond the this stroke here. So you can see how it's extending a little bit beyond. If you look at the stroke on the front, that will tend to extend a little bit beyond the middle stroke as well. You can see it dips out a bit, but there's scope for variety there. But consistency is the main thing. One alternative that's totally acceptable is having this stroke shorter and then extending this a little. But it depends. Of course, it depends what's preceding and what's following. And context is a big factor. So if you had an N here, you wouldn't want this stroke extending too far because it's going to run into the other character. But if you were starting a word with an S, then you could you'd have license for this stroke to be longer. Okay, so let's look at the characters based on the letter N. The letter N actually in type design and calligraphy, it's a significant part of the rhythm of the style that you're working on. So I'll draw an N. You can instantly see the relationship of the N. I'm going to draw an R. An R is actually, it's very much like the N, but it just terminates differently. And then the H is very much like an N. Let's look at the K. Let's look at the B. You can see the relationship here. So let's have a look at this group here and see how they're related. It's really, if you look at the N, which is the key character here, you can see how it's very much related to the M. The M would be roughly double the width of the N. Again, the R is a character that starts off as an N, the similar first stroke, and then goes in a different direction with the second stroke and kind of levels out and flicks up. You can see that the H is simply an N with extending upwards, with the stroke extends upwards. If you look at the key thing here with width, that H, the K, the B and the P are all very similar kind of width. You can see that the top half of the B is actually very much like the H. You're doing the same, you're coming upwards and then instead of going straight down, you're curving in. In terms of the K, let's have a look at the K. If you have a problem with ink flow, by the way, if you just flick down, flick the pen down, that's normally a way to get the ink flowing again quite nicely. So the K is very striking, that you go up and then you come down like this, and then this foot is going to come down here. You don't want to extend it out too far, because to the right, this foot, because you've got to think about its relationship to other letters, because you want to leave space. So, you know, you might have an N next to it, and you have to think about that in terms of how it's going to fit in. So it can extend a little bit beyond the top of the K, but not too far. Think of the K as being in a rectangular box. The stroke comes down, and you're thinking about this box because you have to think about context and its position in a word. And if you work within this box, you can be pretty sure that it will fit next to other letters, subsequent letters. So I'm going to go up, draw the K like this, come down. You see, that's why you don't want to extend too far out, because if you've got an N, pretty much any character you're drawing, be mindful of this rectangle, invisible rectangle. So let's look at an S here. You see how that can come down. Spacing is a big consideration in calligraphy, and you need to think about how spacing is going to work, because you really want to create as much evenness as you can. Okay, let's have a look at the third group. This is the group that's based on the U. Obviously, there's a close relationship between the U and the N. The U is effectively a rotated, 180-degree rotated N. So let's draw a U. I'm going to draw a Y. You'll really see the relationship here is very closely related characters. So that's exactly the same to this point, and then this stroke simply extends down, and then this stroke will join them. So you see, and the widths will be the same. For the lowercase a, similar width to the U. Very similar in lots of ways. You just see there's this stroke that covers the top. So when you're practicing letters, drawing letters, do bear these groups in mind, because it will bring home the relationship of these characters, and it'll be much easier to pick up the inconsistencies. It'll be immediately obvious that this space, the negative space, you want to be the same. Again, here, you'd want the negative space to be the same. You should really be thinking as much about negative space as positive space. G is very similar to an A. It's just this stroke extends down. The Q is even more similar to an A. This is a bit too flat. I'm going to draw it again. It's more of a bowed shape here, and then it flips up. It's coming from a sort of from a 45-degree angle, and then scooping up a bit, so it becomes more vertical. Draw the L. And then the T. There are various ways to draw a T. I'll just draw the style I prefer. Scoop up, and then you just come from the top of the T, come down at 45 degrees, and then you twist. You twist as you come across, and if you twist clockwise, creates a very pleasing shape. You could also draw a T like this. In terms of the most difficult character to get right here, I'd say it's probably the lowercase a. The more strokes you have in a character, really, the more there is to go wrong. I'll draw another one here. There's this curve. This shouldn't be flat in this particular model. There should be a curve here, and then when you're coming up, there's a sort of twist, and then you come down, and then it's this flick again. So it's like a twist as you come up, and that comes with practice. It's just sort of a sort of flick up with a little twist in it. So I'd say that the A is probably the most difficult to draw here. The A and the related forms are some of the most beautiful characters in this italic. I'm just going to draw a G. Once you get going, of course, you can start having fun with ascenders and descenders and doing things like this, which is instantly much more attractive than any of the other G's here. Let's look at a detail on this relationship here of the strokes within this A character. I think it's a really attractive. There's an intersection to be found. I'm exaggerating it a bit here for effect, but there's a really pleasing relationship going on here when it's drawn properly. It just looks very pleasing. This is much better. There's this relationship here in the way these characters intersect. It just adds a sort of crispness to and a kind of very, very characteristic calligraphic touch when you extend this stroke coming down a little, so you get this really nice relationship here. Of course, in terms of these little details, a lot of this boils down to the scale that you're writing at. I'm actually writing at quite a large scale here for obvious reasons. But if I was writing at a much smaller size, I might slightly exaggerate these characteristics so you can see them more clearly. So it's very much about context and the kind of tone of voice you want for something. Okay, let's have a look at the fourth group now. It's a kind of eclectic group, but there are various things that draw them together. Okay, this is the fourth group. It's in a sort of eclectic group, really, and it's a sort of eclectic group, really, and I suppose there's a subgroup here, and the Z is kind of its own thing. So the first three characters here are you can see the clear relationship. This dot on the eye is one of the most calligraphic shapes there is. It's a really, I find it really beautiful, actually. The dot on the eye, you'd draw the main stroke first, like this, and then you'd add this dot, and it's a really, in terms of positioning, I suppose it would be probably two nibwits up, I'd say so, from the X height. So can you see that dot, the edge of the dot kind of runs through something like that. The W, again, ideally, there'd be this shape, the negative space. These should all be kind of very even. There should be an even kind of white space here. And the Z, again, this is a weird one. There are various ways to draw a Z. This is the way I've chosen to draw it here. It's obviously, because of the nature of the tool, it's got a very thin center. You can sometimes beef up this stroke with two strokes. You can also, if you prefer, you can manipulate the pen and so it's thicker, and that's a perfectly reasonable option as well. So it's really into the realms of taste with things like that. This is certainly as good a Z as this one in this context. Okay, so we've been talking about writing individual letters. I think the next stage is writing out words. So let's look at the word minimum. Minimum's a really good word to practice. It's got those key letters, that lowercase n and the lowercase m, and you'll see under the U, which is a rotated n effectively. So let's have a go. It's as important you think about the negative space, the white space between the letters as it is the letters themselves. So you should aim for an evenness here. This isn't too bad, and this eye's a little close to the end, but it's okay. So I'm maintaining this 45-degree angle, and when I'm arcing out, I'm rotating. So that's the word minimum. You can see how closely related all these forms are. So, and you can see that you're aiming for consistency though, so that the three M's should be a very similar width. And so that's a really good practice word, because you start thinking about some of the key letters that create what we call the rhythm in calligraphy in a given style. I'll talk about the spacing between words now. That's one of the things that calligraphers often do wrong is when they start is the space is too big between words. So I think you should aim for the space between two words should roughly be a lowercase a. So if I started here, that would be too much. Working at this size, I mean, the space between words is also and letters is also relates to and is affected by the size you're working at. The smaller size you're working out, the more space you'd want to give between letters and between words. Working at this size, think about that A. That's a pretty good distance. And again, I'm arcing out, sort of, so when I'm holding the pen like this, it's going to spin out, it's going to arc out and then come down. So that's the word minimum. Let's try something else now. I'm also going to talk about the fact that some letter combinations are awkward, and it makes sense to join them as shown in these examples. Let's try the word flavouring. I've chosen this word because this is sort of takes things further now. We're talking about introducing ascenders and descenders into the word. The ascender from the F is fusing into the stroke of the L, the main stem of the L, and that just creates, if it didn't do that, there'd be clashing at the top and there'd be too much space between the F and the L. So this is the word flavouring, and again thinking about space between words, think about that lowercase a as a kind of good benchmark. So yeah, that's a reasonable kind of space between two words. I'll talk a little bit more about letter forms that clash, where you need to modify them to get things to sit comfortably. A really good example is double T. Now, can you see that what I've done here is the crossbar I'm going to create from one stroke. So I'm going to come across, and that's a ligature, double T ligature. You can see there's this evenness, and again, think about the white space between. If you look at the shape, the space here is pretty even, and that's very desirable in terms of creating harmony. So italic is defined as a semi-cursive style, and that essentially means that some letters join when you're writing it. I like variety. I think it just adds a richness. If this isn't drawn very well, but you get the idea here that this I is running into this N. It could equally not do, and either would be fine. I think the key is, for me, is I like variation, so things don't need to join or they can join. I think a little bit of variety can be nice. Okay, now if you look at the workbook that you can download, I've included a setting of the word hamburger fonstive, which is it's used in type design a lot, because if you look at these characters, you've really got the blueprint for a whole lowercase here. This is a really good starting point for understanding the DNA of a typeface. So what is a really good way to understand, I'd encourage you to do this, is print out this page at for 100% scale, and then you can trace over the letters, and this is a really good way to understand proportions. And you'll start thinking about the letters as not as letters but shapes, and it's a kind of good way to put aside your preconceived ideas about what a letter M looks like, for example. So this is a really good way to understand what's going on with the pen. Okay, so let's start thinking about the uppercase now. Now, the uppercase is more difficult to draw than the lowercase. There are a number of reasons for that. I think some of the forms are more nuanced, and there's a bit more pen manipulation, which means a rotation of the nib when you're writing. I'm going to talk through the basics of the uppercase. I'll probably write out 4 or 5 characters and discuss what's going on. So in your workbook, you've got what's known as the ductus, which is the order of the strokes that you'd use to construct each of these. This is a swash italic. I've included a swash italic rather than a more basic italic because I just think they're such fun characters to draw. You wouldn't necessarily create cap settings out of swash characters. That wouldn't really look very good. It would be hard to create an evenness. But I was thinking more for this workshop in terms of writing, when you're writing names out and so on, it's nice to have some real character to uppercase forms. So yeah, let's begin. Now remember that caps are 7, in this particular exemplar, they're 7 nib widths high. So, as opposed to the lowercase, which are 5, so I'll just draw them so you can see them on camera. This is the X height. The caps are going to come up about another two nib widths high. Let's start with the A. Now the stroke order that you'll see in the worksheet, it's kind of logical. It's not set in stone. You might feel comfortable constructing in a different way, but this is how I do things. So. This key stroke is going to be 5 degrees leaning. And that's how you'll create a unity in terms of how everything's going to sit together because you'll draw a lowercase now. So if I drew an L next to the A, you can see that instantly makes sense. So that would be how you draw an A. And then if I was writing the word alphabet, I'll just write these. I'll do something with an ascender and a descender, just so you can see the kind of context of the A and how it would sit. Again, think about that 5 degree lean. I'm going to start near the top of the 7 nib widths, come down, and then, the way I do it, again, other people would do things differently, possibly is, so that's a reasonable B. So, it's not exactly 7 nib widths here. I have the way I work is not ultra formal. It's really quite playful, and I'm not particularly bothered about the caps being perfectly exactly 7 nib widths all the time. I think there can be a nice energy that you can get from a bit more variety. The C relates to the O and it relates to the G. There are round characters in uppercase, there are square characters in the uppercase, and there are diagonal characters in the uppercase. So in the same way there are in the lowercase. So a C is obviously quite a round character. And if you remember the exercises at the beginning, this is one of the key strokes in the uppercase. So there's this 45 degree angle, curl around like this, terminate here, and then come up, and you're going to twist to about, so you're 45 degrees. Remember when I was talking about pen manipulation and how there's quite a lot of it in the uppercase? I'm coming out of this stroke and I'm twisting, so it's going from 45 degrees to maybe 5 degrees by the time it finishes, and I'm just coming down like this. The next character is the D. The D relates to the B, as you'll see. So I'm starting about 7 nib widths high. Let it come down. I'll sweep out again. See, at this point, this could actually be a B so far. But instead of coming in like this, it's going to be one movement. It's going to come around like that, and then the swash aspect is the decorative stroke here. If it wasn't a swash, it would terminate in a different way here. Let's draw an E. Okay, so again we're thinking about 7 nib widths high. So I'm starting a bit lower than that, coming down, sweeping out, and then I'm going to go like this. I'm twisting the nib again when it terminates here, like I did with the C. And then for the E, you can go all the way across. I'm just for this character, I'm going to do this. So I'm now going to draw a capital F. You'll see the capital F relates to the E very closely. Same as the E to this point. Then it dips below the baseline. In this particular style, I'll come back to that stroke, I think, but I'll focus on one of the key strokes here is the top. Like the E, twisting. When you're writing crossbars or drawing crossbars, this is a crossbar and that's a crossbar. Very often, instead of 45 degrees, you're going to be more like maybe 30 or 35, because it's quite pleasing. You wouldn't want this stroke to be very heavy when it's crossing a heavy stroke. It just has a bit more elegance and it looks more correct optically if you're twisting the nib a little, maybe 30, 35 degrees. And then this last stroke on the F is, and you can have a lot of fun with these. This could start here, and there's lots of scope for variety, but for our purposes, something like that. So one of the key strokes in this swash capital set is this stroke here. It's the one I did here with the B, and the one I did here with the D. You can see it also in the E and the F. And that's effectively what makes it a swash capital. Once you get going, there are all sorts of ways you can extend things and make things a lot more intricate. I think this is one of the key features in the cap, certainly. So I'll draw a K, for example. There's an underlying template you're thinking of in terms of widths. You can see that the E and the F are about the same width. You could certainly make the F slightly narrower. That would be completely fine. For the K, I'm thinking the K is going to be roughly the same width as the E. It will just, and when you start writing words, you start seeing that to create this evenness and harmony, that proportions are really important in terms of capitals. And consistency is really important, because you could I've seen wonderful calligraphy where the caps are all incredibly wide and the lowercase are really narrow, and that's absolutely fine, that can work really well, but it's just about consistency. If you're going to do that, then you need to do that consistently. This is a much more even kind of relationship between the caps and the lowercase. I think you will find the uppercase more difficult to write. There are various reasons for that. I think two of the most difficult characters to write in the uppercase are the M and the W. A lot of that's to do with the number of strokes, and there's quite a lot of pen manipulation. I'll demonstrate. I'll draw an M to illustrate this. there's this sweeping stroke. Now this isn't starting at 45 degrees. If it did that, the weight distribution would be wrong. So I'm going to start at a steeper angle than that. I've actually gone over this again to, the hairline was too thin, and that's absolutely legitimate thing to do. Again, the hairline here is a little bit thin, so I'm going to touch it in. An important consideration with this character is you want these to be very similar. These internal triangles to be very similar in terms of space. It just looks most pleasing when that's the case. And it just looks correct. I'll put an I next to it and an N. You can see, again, I've given the capital M a bit more breathing space in here compared to the lowercase, how the lowercase characters space. This is actually quite tight spacing. You could, depending on what the context, and if in headlines sometimes the tight spacing is good, but in other contexts, you could certainly let these breathe a bit more, and it would be a good idea. Okay, so that concludes the section on capitals, and now we're going to get flourishing. Okay, so in this section we're going to talk about flourishing. Now, in calligraphy, there is this technique called flourishing. It's essentially using decorative strokes that extend from ascenders and descenders and other exit points of letters, and it certainly can appear in the caps too. And it's a way of introducing even more drama and elegance and beauty to what's already a really beautiful kind of base. It's a system essentially, and there are rules that govern it, but I think that there is also freedom within that system. So there are sort of maybe 3 or 4 key principles that you'd want to think about. But beyond that, the exciting thing really is the sky's the limit, and it can really, you can add a lot of drama and fun and beauty to in this context, names. And that's what we're going to do today. Okay, so I've taken my jacket off because it gives me a bit more freedom to move. And actually, when you're doing flourishing, your elbow should not be touching the table when you're working. The only part of the hand and arm that's touching the paper will be this underside of your hand. So maybe I'll draw a flourish and I'll talk about it and whether it's worked or not. So this is curvilinear flourishing, and I'm using these 2 pens taped together, which I'll explain why. So this has worked quite well. There's a real fluidity to this. It's a good thing to cross for lines to intersect at kind of around 90 degrees. What doesn't work is if you have 2 strokes and they're crossing like this. This creates it draws attention to itself. It kind of becomes a spot in the flourish. What's much better is to have this kind of this just creates a greater sense of evenness if intersections are as close to 90 degrees as possible. So this isn't too bad. I'm going to attach this now to let's pretend this at the beginning this was coming off an N, a letter N. So it's technically a flourish rather than just and some sort of ornament. Can you see that there's quite a nice evenness? We've talked about positive and negative space. The white space here, as it would be if this was was coloured in, this stroke was coloured in, it's quite even. As a general rule, you wouldn't want 2 thick strokes crossing each other, because again that creates a kind of spot in the composition that doesn't work. So you can see here there's a thin is crossing a thick, thin crossing thick, thin crossing thick, and that's been maintained throughout, and that's a really important consideration. So there's evenness, there's the fluidity of the curves to consider, and there's also this thick thin thing to consider. If you do flourishing very carefully and tentatively, it almost never works. There has to be confidence in what you're doing. It's very easy to see if you're lacking confidence or you're lacking knowledge or experience, because I mean there's a nice fluidity to this. The curves are pleasing. This was a whole arm movement. This is kind of an advanced technique. That what we'll be doing in terms of flourishing today is we'll be planning the flourishing carefully, because it's a much better way to understand what successful flourishing is and how it works. With experience, you start to understand the system and the language of flourishing, and you can work completely. You can improvise and it can work quite well. But that comes with time. I think what we need to do in the lesson today is think about how letter forms relate to successful flourishes, coming off ascenders and descenders particularly. If you think of those things, you're well on the way to producing good flourishing. So I think I'll write out the word Stephen. Let me do that. Flourishing should look really natural. It should look almost organic, like a vine growing out of a letter or something. It should have a flow and a sort of harmony, and a kind of harmony that harmonises with the letters. It should complement the letters. Now, how can I do that in this composition? You could use up to 4 flourishes in this setting, but I'm just going to do 2. So this would be the first one. This would be a natural place to flourish. It shouldn't look forced. It shouldn't look like it's tacked onto the letters. It should look like it's absolutely fundamentally part of them. So I'm going to echo the flourish at the top and the bottom. Think about the negative space again. That's kind of even. That's good. So that they would be the 2 natural places to flourish. You could also extend. I'll pen them in but I won't actually ink them. You could also do something like this, and maybe like that, but we won't draw those in. So now, so you've planned them, and then we can just ink them in. 45-degree angle, exactly like the letter forms themselves. Can you see how naturally the tool creates this beautiful contrast? And that's, I mean, this is crude, but you get the gist. This is actually, that sits very well in this context. And let's mirror the effect down here. So that's a reasonably successful flourishing of the name Stephen. Can you see how these strokes, there's this evenness here. This angle is the same on the top and the bottom, which is important. The counters, the negative space here and here, and here is about the same, which is good. An alternative actually for flourishing this would be to not do these 2 flourishes, and you could just instead you could do something like this. There are two conflicting ideas going on here, so it would really be one or the other. But this is a good idea in terms of flourishing off the cap and the last letter. That works quite well. So it would be one or the other. Okay, so one of the things to think about when you're flourishing is legibility.